Hi, everybody, and welcome to Purpose People. We're going to be meeting Jerry Henman from Film Duo. He's the other half. We spoke to Andy earlier, and we're going to explore a little bit about storytelling, what it means to tell stories and to tell stories with purpose. So welcome, Jerry.
Thank you, Darrell. Lovely to be here.
So, Jerry, obviously we're talking about stories, but let's find about your story. How did you get into script writing and telling stories and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess like a lot of people at school, I wasn't quite sure by the time I left school what I really wanted to do. And I ended up doing a variety of jobs, but did a marketing degree at business college. And that led me into sort of some interesting places with consultancies and then a bit of freelancing. But my journey with storytelling really started when I went to Australia. And this, sadly, is a pre-internet, or just about sort of in around 2000. So the internet was its early days. And instead of looking online, I ended up in a bookshop in Australia, and I found a book on storytelling. It's actually a book that a lot of scriptwriters will be familiar with, called Story by Robert McKee.
Okay.
And what was interesting about it is quite an academic tone, and there's been a couple of films that's been made where they sort of, slightly take the mick out of Robert McKee as a sort of story guru. But what struck me most was the kind of attributes that you have to be a storyteller, as much as actually the mechanics of telling story. And that's what really chimed with me. And I thought, yeah, that's me. I like that.
Because your background is obviously in copywriting as well. You've done very well commercially as a copywriter. So, how did you make that? Was that always the plan to segue more into script writing than writing copy? Because writing copy is a skill in itself.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that was very much the marketing background, was the copywriting. But at that time, so in 2000, I was 30, and personal circumstances, I needed a break. So I went to Australia actually for the Sydney Olympics, but ended up staying 6 months. And it was during that period I realized that I needed a bit of change in life. And that's when I found that sort of I wanted to tell stories, but through the medium of film was the first port of call. And then over the years, that has also morphed into writing books and doing other things. So it's basically all around storytelling, but very much first port was with film. Yeah.
So in terms of telling stories, I mean, where do you think is the most difficult part in that journey? Is it the opening? Is it the ending? Is it the middling bit that seems to, or is it the twist? If you were writing a story, what's the bit that storytellers always seem to struggle to get right?
The hardest bit, and I think this is true of any creative discipline, is the start. Because the hardest thing is when you have that blank piece of paper or a blank screen in front of you, and there are 10 million ways to start a story. Yeah. But until you actually start telling the story, you're just thinking about it. You're not actually writing. So there's an expression that sort of is, might be relatively well known in the writers community of, you're not really a writer, you're a rewriter. And what that really means is that until you've got something down, you haven't started a story. Once you've got it down, and whatever it is, whether it's a line, a paragraph, a full screenplay, a book, you rewrite it and the process has begun. So for me, it's the actual blank piece of paper starting. And again, depending on what story I'm trying to tell. So it might be, recently we've just done a documentary, and that's trying to bring someone else's story to life. It's finding the way in, finding the hook.
Yeah.
And then that's when my sort of, brain starts to come to life, if you like. I go, okay, so I might write down a line on screen, or it might not be the very intro of what the piece is, but it's just getting me literally words on the page, as it were, and then the process begun. Yeah,
I mean, in terms of storytelling, I've seen lots of people write with cards, so you divide the whole piece as a sense of cards, which has got almost cue cards, and then you just move them around. Is that something that you do as a practice? Or?
I do a variant of that. I mean, I would describe that as outlining.
Yeah.
And it's, again, how you learn. So I did the sort of classic thing, which a lot of people do when they start any disciplines, to read every book I could read about script writing. And then you almost have to forget most of it. You've learned the basics, but then make it what works for you. So one of the classic things is with an ending, some people say you must have the ending in mind because that's the goal you're heading for your story. Yeah. But there's equally a school of thought that says if you have an ending in mind, you will end up writing a story that becomes quite obvious. And we've all heard and seen so many stories now in the medium that people clue in very quickly as to where it's going. Yeah. So it really, I would say actually it's a case-by-case basis to sort of bring it to life and up to times of, there's just something that's just happened. We've just done a documentary called Dare to Hope, and it followed Harry Skeggs, a wildlife photographer, to Antarctica. And before he went, we said, right, so what's the story? What's the goal? What are you trying to do? And we knew he was going to capture or try and capture wildlife and show the impact of climate change on the wildlife in that region. But he didn't really know, because he couldn't know what wildlife he was going to capture, when he was going to capture it. So it's a very loose goal at that point. And you're for a writer or a storyteller, you're going, well, we've got a basic narrative, but we're not sure how this is going to play out. So something I will totally believe in is that you tell a story 3 times, really. Once in the preparation, once in the actual shooting of the capture, and once in the post or the edit. Yeah. And for this particular story, I would say we had a narrative. They had a narrative shooting out in Antarctica, but we found the true narrative in the post-production, in the edit. And that's that's how it worked.
So interesting, because obviously Hollywood has a formula. People talk about the hero's journey. Yeah. I think in our workshop, we use that as a structure just to communicate testimonials, effectively, while we can deal with objections and stuff like that, but literally tell the story. And one of the things we say that for a client, the client's not the hero of the people that they serve. They're the Mr. Miyagi. So the kids all know me now that when we're watching a movie, they go, Dad, is that the all is lost moment? Because they know they can see it. You can see it in every movie. Now, some movies, which I think I was watching Notting Hill the other day, which is really interesting because the pace of that movie now compared to the pace of movies now, it actually gave you time to digest the script. Whereas now it's like they say a gag and then there's another gag and there's another gag. But there was quite a few all is lost moments in that movie. It was like up and down, up and down, up and down. And eventually, those of you who haven't seen the film, it's worth watching. I enjoy it. But there's a formula. And it's very obvious there's a formula to it. How do you look to implement that formula in terms of the videos? Or are you trying to reinvent the formula, do it slightly different?
I would say that every sort of story, every narrative needs a structure of some form. But the way I use it now is, and Dare to Hope being the example of that, we went back to the hero's journey, the classic hero journey, and even that has many variants. Yeah. But really to reference that we're sort of getting the basics of the story that we want to tell. And I was actually saying to my business partner, Andy, the other day that there's a middle section of that documentary where traditionally, if you were going beat by the hero's journey story, you would have, X goes to Y to Z, but we went for X goes to Y and then lived in Y a lot longer because it was actually part of the story. So the story is that he's reached his point where he has had some success. And then you might, in traditional hero's journey storytelling, say that leads to a certain point on that path. But we lived in the fact that he then had another bit of failure straight afterwards, because that's actually what happened in the documentary. That's what happened in when they were out there. And that felt to me authentic and the right way to go, rather than go, well, it doesn't fit the beat of a structure. So you're using it as a reference point rather than... So it's like a guide point.
Yes, exactly. It must tick those boxes along the journey because people can see a progression, but when it happens is not so important.
No, exactly. Yeah. And you've got to make it your own. I mean, that's the thing about, telling any story is that they can become formulaic, and what you want is to surprise people. Actually, what you really want to do is surprise people, but in the way that they want to be surprised. That's the key. So if it's just formulaic A to B, it's why I'm a big fan of sport, which I think you are as well, and it's why I love watching live sport because it doesn't follow a pattern. You know the structure of a football game. It's 90 minutes or 90 minutes plus, but you don't actually know what's going to happen in that game. It's
the
time.
Unpredictability.
Exactly.
I think it's the live TV Sky talking about recently. It's about watching it live.
There's only one. Yeah, exactly. There's only live once. I think
it's only live once, and it is.
Yeah.
I'm watching, like, let's say a Champions League final. I'm a Liverpool fan. I was 3-0 down. And I remember the phone ringing off the hook, and my mate, who's a massive Man United fan, laughing at us down the phone. And I just said flippantly, well, it's going to be 3-3, we're going to beat them on penalties. And I just said it like that because that was a story I was hoping for. Most dramatic way to win it. I didn't expect it to actually happen. And we did. So that was an amazing story. And sports stories stick for those triumph against the odds, the all is lost moment. All those elements are in that journey. At 3-0 down at half time, all is gone, all is over. Yeah. And yet then the crescendo of actually the ending was unbelievable, that they actually managed to pull it off. That story sticks. And that's what makes stories memorable, that you can take people on a complete and utter journey. And I think the key to sports teams, or certainly their journey, is whether they get out of that slump, where all is some teams don't, and they just get relegated, and it just gets worse. But as a Liverpool fan, there are plenty of moments like that where it's been all chips down and they've come back.
But that's it's just to say. So I think it's a sort of, if you look at it, there's a saying again in sort of filmmaking of, especially in sort of the Hollywood system, the studio system of what do you want, and it's like, give us the same but different. And some people struggle with that, but to me, I think, as a writer, I get it totally, in the sense of, you're watching the same. We watch a football match, you're watching the same, but it's a different outcome. Yeah. It's a different, maybe teams, but there's a different.
But there's a structure, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, that's the sort of the reality of it, I think.
Obviously with the emergence of social media and, people making 60-second videos and 5-second, fines was like 6 seconds, wasn't it? Right away through to, like 15-minute features and then 30-minute features. And then you got the long piece, an hour and a half, 2 hours. What do you enjoy the most as a format?
I spent sort of about 8 to 10 years in indie film. So that's really my sort of where I come from my storytelling piece. But I like the challenge of telling a story in a longer format like a film, but less long than an episodic, sort of 13-part series on TV, because I think it is more difficult, and I like that challenge. But if you sometimes do as we do, you sort of little behind the scenes, you might capture a moment, and there's a story in that moment, and that's equally exciting. But personally, it's a sort of film length, so that might be an hour and a half, might be 2 hours, something like that. Capturing a full story in that time period, I think, is a great challenge, and that's what I really love to do, whether it's a documentary or scripted drama. So,
talking about movie, what's your favourite movie?
Oh no, that's a question of.
Or does it keep changing?
Well, I think one of my all-time favourite movies is a movie called Heat by Michael Mann. And I've sort of, it's one I've done quite a deep dive into. I've read various books on how he did it. And I think it's just, the application that he put into it. He researched it for about 20 years. He made a sort of TV version of the film first, and then made the big Hollywood. I think it's called LA Takedown. And to me, it shows in every aspect of the filmmaking, of the acting's right. I actually think it's Val Kilmer's best performance. I know, sorry for Top Gun fans, because he's good in that too.
But at least it's better than Batman.
Well, there is that. But everything about it, the writing, the directing, the performances, the production values, it's just spot on for me. So there are other films that come and go, but actually that's one I go back to, and I probably watch it every couple of years, and just always find something new when I watch it.
Is it just the story, or do you identify with a particular character, or is it just just one of those films that just?
I think for me, it's when you talk about the hero's journey, it's quite easy to concentrate on the hero's arc. So therefore, you're looking at that particular arc of getting the fullness of character for that. But in that particular film, Heat, even the little B-rolls, you might call them, or even C-rolls. So one of the characters is a short order cook and then takes on the job to be the getaway driver. But he has a lovely little backstory, and he's only in the film probably screen time, I don't know, 7-8 minutes or something. But there's this whole story in his little bit, and I think that's why I like it, because every character seems to have a full arc, and it's just a full film. It works.
It's an interesting one, because Dunkirk, which is Christopher Nolan, that kind of doesn't follow the conventional formula.
No.
And I remember first watching and thinking, this is confusing. What is going on here? And it's about an hour and a half in, and you start to work out actually what's going on. And the reason why I like it as a film was it gave me the opportunity to see what I thought my granddad would be like. So there's a bit at the end with Tom Hardy.
Yeah.
He's a Spitfire pilot. And eventually you see him at the end, and the plane's flying across and the music's playing. And for me, I watch that and I get quite emotional when I watch it, because I didn't see my granddad in his zenith, obviously, because I'm a lot younger. But when I did meet him, he was in a wheelchair. That's what I remember, him being in a wheelchair and being quite, infirm. And what I didn't know is his backstory. And his backstory is an interesting one, because he was a seafarer pilot. I think it's a seafarer pilot, which is the Spitfire that lands on boats, basically.
Right, yeah.
So it's on aircraft carrier. And he was flying back from a mission, and he was going to land on the Ark Royal. The Ark Royal got torpedoed by the Germans.
Wow.
Now, the interesting part of that story is that he was actually flying at that time to land on that ship just before it was torpedoed. But before he got there, 3 Messerschmitts come out of the sun.
Okay.
Shot at the planes. Obviously, he's in one of them. A bullet goes through the floor of the plane, goes through his chin and out the top of his head.
Wow.
He crash lands his plane into the sea. He's broken both his legs as a result of the crash. He manages to get out and get rescued.
Okay.
He gets taken to hospital, and he gets nursed back to health from a lady from an Italian family. And this story is great, because I'd love to make it one day. But the journey was this, that if he had landed on the aircraft carrier, which he was meant to land on, he'd probably be dead.
Right, yeah.
Because that was in real time. This was happening. But the person that nursed him back to health, this Italian, they become his wife.
Ha! Fantastic.
And her name was Joy. So it's quite, you talk about dare to hope. There's a situation where a really dark moment. He then meets, someone that nurses him back to health and becomes his wife. And, there's so many things there that are just mind blowing in the way that could happen. But it's that story that story now lives with me. And every time I watch Dunkirk, I see that plane fly across, and I'm just thinking, wow, because there's that self-sacrificial moment where he lands the plane, and obviously they see the Germans in the background trying to capture him and stuff.
Well, we can make that story. We'll pitch it as Dunkirk meets The English Patient. There you
absolutely. Go. But it's, even when I talk about it, that's the power of storytelling for me. Yeah. And those are the sorts of things that demand to be made. Those stories are lost. And all I remember is, we didn't know that story was almost lost forever until my son was doing a school project, and he said, I'll do it with my granddad. And then my dad tells us, like, I've lived in this home with you for however many years, and you've never mentioned it. And now I carry that story around all the time, with one hope to make it at some point.
Well, absolutely. And look, it's the classic truth is stranger than fiction, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's, again, I sort of, as I was saying earlier, spent sort of 8-10 years in indie filmmaking, which was fantastic. And it was a scripted drama, essentially. But now I'm sort of moving into documentaries more, and people have amazing stories. And when you find out some of the things that people have been through and you scratch the surface, it's like, it's the old cliche, but if a Hollywood producer pitched that, no one would ever believe them because that's too out there. So, that's an extraordinary story you've just told. And it's... Do
you collect stories? Have you got like a little bank where you collect stories and go, one day I might revisit that?
The whole time. Absolutely the whole time. So I'm constantly sort of, writing little snippets or ideas, and sometimes I let them percolate, and sometimes they evolve into greater things. Sometimes I go back to them and go, no, that's just a moment. It's not really a story. But that once you get into that way of thinking, it's you can't turn the tap, or I can't. They're just constantly there.
Yeah.
And it's a bit like sort of, as people say, when you sort of, creative process, how do you work? It's often when you're doing the most mundane things like washing up or driving somewhere else that you get inspiration for that moment or a story. Whereas if you sit down and go, today I'm going to create the most amazing story, that's a hard job.
Ideas in the shower, often the toilet, they're probably the two places that they seem to come, because you're obviously doing something completely different. But the reality is that, for me, is having the ability to tell stories then give you that memory base. It creates a history that you can go back. And that's what I love about YouTube, is that what you put on there stays on there.
Yes, exactly.
And it might not get discovered immediately, but it may be, 2 years' time, that video that was on there, everyone starts watching it and going, wow, isn't this incredible? And something that was almost gone and invisible becomes viral, and everyone starts watching it. And Dare to Hope, for example, is on the website. It's on YouTube. It's under Nikon, isn't it? As
Nikon Europe.
So let's just tell the story of Dare to Hope, because obviously that's how we ended up working, or creation and the team worked with you with the soundtrack and stuff. How did the script writing, the videography and the soundtrack, how did all that come together? And obviously you wanted to make sure that it all fits the narrative and the story.
Absolutely. So essentially my role on Dare to Hope was as a story producer, because it's a documentary. So, I'm trying to shape a narrative, I think is the best way to say.
Okay,
so an example of that is, like, we did a lot of pre-prep before Harry Skeggs, who's the photographer, and Sam Hockley, the self-shooting director, went out to Antarctica. And I was trying to impress them because, or certainly on Harry, it's a new world for him. I mean, he obviously tells stories with his stills, but telling stories in video or film is a different thing. We do need conflict. That's what makes a story. If everything goes really well and it's just sort of, you arrive and you get the nice shot, that might be wonderful, but it's not a story. And again, I often use...
But not true to life either.
No, exactly. And I often use the example of sort of, which is again quite a well-known example, but sort of, if you go meet a friend and they've just been on holiday and they've had the most amazing time, you might give them a couple of minutes. If your friend says, I've just been the most extraordinary experience and everything went wrong, you pull up a chair, get a drink, and there's half an hour. It's with hopefully a good ending. But to give you an example of perhaps how it sort of works in practicality. So we did a lot of pre-prep. This is what we want to happen, bit of the unknown. And then about 3 days into the trip, the guys have gone out there. They're on the boat traveling towards the Antarctic Peninsula, and there's a bit of Wi-Fi intermittent connection. And I get in contact with Sam and say, how's it going? And he says, it's not great, Jerry. It's the light is appalling. We haven't really seen the animals we want to see. Harry's actually getting quite stressed. And I just basically reply, sounds perfect, because I know we need that conflict. Now, obviously, what we didn't know at the time, which
you had arranged it all.
Exactly, it was all set up. But you know that it's the whole. There are certain tropes which hold true to storytelling, in my opinion. One of them is, you have obstacles in the way of your goal, and how do you overcome these obstacles? And I really believe in that. So yes, at that point, there's a bit of a sort of, that sounds great. We need something positive at the end, because we are trying to make it's dare to hope, not dare to fail or dare to despondency. It's, and well, you'll have to watch the actual documentary if you really want to see what the ending is, but let's just say it did fall into place. So it was good. But you need that conflict to make it interesting, because as you rightly said, Darrell, that's true to life. Life isn't easy. You are overcoming challenges, whatever they are, the whole time, and that's how you progress and move forward.
And it goes back to that conflict thing. We've just moved house, obviously, and hence we're filming here. And it's funny because me and Nathan, one of my team, we're on this parallel journey. So Nathan's moved to this house that's got nothing in it whatsoever.
Right.
And I've moved into a really nice property and it's all done for me. And I'm moaning about the Wi-Fi.
Of course.
Oh, no Wi-Fi, this sucks. And he's going, I've got no kitchen and I'm washing up in a bath, and I'm like, yeah, okay, that's a more powerful story than mine. And but the point is, the struggles the struggles are relevant to ourselves,
Yeah.
but it's that empathy piece.
Yes.
You know, put myself in Nathan's shoes and I was like, you know what, actually I got it all right. Thanks very much by comparison. Pleased to say everybody, Nathan now has a kitchen. And they're not washing up in the bath, but it's those simple things where is to put yourself in the shoes of someone else is the beginning of storytelling, I think.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, and if your video or your movie or your story can say, put yourself there, then you that's where all the feelings and the emotions and stuff come. And I mean, that's why to some degree superhero movies have gained a lot of traction because everyone's like going through a tough time through lockdown or, you know, how do I fight against this monster called, you know, COVID or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's that escapism from now and trying to say, well, how do I fight back? Because if I'm honest, everyone wants to be a Spider-Man or a Superman deep down.
Of course. And you know, that's exactly. So, you know, the hero's journey is called that for a reason. It's about a hero. But I think there are other things at play as well. So with Dare to Hope, one of the goals was, as well as creating a strong narrative that was interesting, engaging, and had a message at the end of it, it was actually to reveal more of Harry's character. So how do you reveal, you know, who you really are? Well, you actually have a hopeful or create situations where people are under pressure.
Yeah.
Because when people are stressed and pressured, they really do reveal themselves in true ways. And I think, you know, the feedback for the documentary has been great on that sense, because a lot of people said, I really got to know what Harry's about. And the reason they've got to know what Harry's about as a person and is because he's been through the mill. He can't get what he wants.
You can see it in there. You can see it. There's a conversation he's having. You can see he's not a happy bunny at all. And then you can see after he's got that shot, we won't give it all away, how he actually says that it's a moment, and a moment's changed his outlook on the entire day.
Yeah.
You know, just to get that moment. And I think for me, that's what it's like, isn't it? Sometimes it's like working in darkness and all of a sudden, bang, one thing happens and it's like everything changes. I was looking at it from the point of view, if you could play a role in a movie, in talking about the hero's journey, would you rather be the hero or the Mr. Miyagi character?
The villain.
Or the villain even? What role would you like?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it's a lot of actors say that the villain's the most interesting piece, the most interesting role to play. But I suppose probably I'm someone I'm a half glass full person, so I like the positive outcome. So, you know, at the end of the day, the villain is doing something bad or gets destroyed or whatever, whereas actually the hero or characters around the hero do something positive normally in most stories at the end. So probably the hero, I think.
Probably the hero, yeah. I think for me, as I've got older, I actually, maybe because I'm looking like them, the Mr. Miyagi type, you know, I kind of like that finding that young person, mentoring and schooling them and stuff, you know, the Alfred or whatever. I mean, I'm not as old as him, but I kind of like that. I think that's kind of the role that I've taken in my life, I think. That's
really interesting, actually, because I would say in terms of filmmaking, that's definitely something I enjoy of like nurturing. So, you know, one of the great pleasures in this is working with Nathan and George, your two guys on the soundtrack.
Yeah.
And we had to create something in quite a short period of time. And I've been lucky enough to work on a previous documentary, which we also both worked on, The Real You, Alistair Morrison. And I had access to a friend of mine's whole soundtrack, which I'd heard years before, and I just knew would make a really good score.
Yeah.
So I was working with a great editor, Mark Rogers, and we put that together and sort of, you know, along with him, we've sort of scored most of the documentary ourselves. So suddenly we're in a situation like working with new people, didn't know their work, and you're sort of going, well, look, we have a certain level here that we play at, if you like, we operate at, and it's got to match that. Otherwise, you know, we don't want to drop down. We will use archive.
Yeah.
So we put in a bit of prep. Had the first meeting online with the guys, and they sent over some stuff. And right from the get-go, it was like, oh, this is on. They are absolutely on point. Already we can see, you know, Sam and I, the director, talked about creating a motif. It's probably the first thing that Nathan said. It's create a motif. It's like we're on the same page. Yeah. And they absolutely nailed it. So going back to your point about the Mr. Miyagi thing, it's sort of, there's talent out there. Yeah. And that's actually something I love to find, to discover emerging talent.
Yeah.
Because, you know, these guys are really talented, but the world might not know their work, but they should know their work because they've got something, and it's like, it's that's a joy. That's an absolute joy.
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of film. I touched on it with Andy when he was here, that everyone's got a role to play within the movie, and there's space for everyone to really win. There's no coincidence that, like in the BAFTAs or the Oscars, there's the sound engineers win, or the actors, the director, the scriptwriter. Everyone has a role to play. And I think if you can all work together, you can create something really special. That watching a video or watching a movie is the combination of all these skills and talents. Often we leave the cinema at the end, where all the credits of the names are, and we don't give them the credit that they deserve. And when you look at it, or if you ever sit, certainly for a Marvel movie, you have to sit there for 5 minutes to watch the twist at the end. You see all the people that it takes to make something special. And, there was a lot of people involved in Dare to Hope, a lot of hours put in, a lot of effort to put in, that ultimately in the moment in time, it's only like 30 minutes. But the amount of work behind creating that were hours and hours and hours. And I mean, as Andy said, it was like 2 years in the making.
Absolutely. And look, it's a phrase that actually Andy uses a lot, which I love, because it's so true to the essence of filmmaking, which is collaboration. To create something which works, has impact, you have to collaborate. Now, you need leadership. There's people who've got to lead their certain aspects, whether it's directing, producing, writing, or music scores. Like, they've all got to, know where they're heading and be sure of it. But to make something come together, it is a collaboration. It's what it's about. And if you don't have that, it doesn't. In my experience, it doesn't work. It's
exactly. So tell us a little about, obviously you work with Andy, and you've got this company called Film Duo that is really now setting itself up to make documentaries on a regular basis. What's next on your rostrum?
Next to us, we've got a few projects sort of sort of bubbling under, as we call it. There's definitely scope to make more Dare to Hope, because we both all enjoyed, and I'm speaking for Harry here, but he has said that to us. He'd enjoy the process and sees the value of it. I think sort of just, rather than going to sort of specifics, to me, it's documentaries. We want to make documentaries that have an underlying message, that stand for something. So, with Dare to Hope, there is that conservation message of what is the impact of climate change that we are doing, in cities around the world, that actually affects something in Antarctica and the animals there, because that's such a, as Harry calls it, the battleground of climate change. But the next documentary might be in that vogue, but it also might be different, but it has to stand for something. You've got to, it's not just making a film for the film's sake. Even if the story's good, it's got to have some impact. It's got to have meaning. And that's, as we know, we're on the purpose podcast. That's what it's about. It's having, that purpose of, like, Harry talks about with climate change is incremental change rather than sort of the grand gestures. But anything you do is just to sort of, reveal more about a subject, maybe educate them in some way, but let people know about it, and then hopefully inspires them to do something, even if it's a tiny thing. That feels powerful.
Yeah, I think for me, it goes back to, the method is video or movie or film, whatever we want to call it, but it's all about the message. And the great thing about video is it's consumed more than anything else. We've seen the change in social media. It's more video than even just posts now. I think Instagram are even rewarding creators more than anything else now to get more content on TikTok. Obviously, a lot of film people have started using that as well, using TikTok to do the shorts to get them to go and watch the long form content, which is on YouTube. But it's all about the message. And I think if you've got the right message, that's half the story. You've got the message. This is what I want. You might not know how it plays out, but having the right message to deliver the momentum behind your message is absolutely key. And I think for us, as in creation, we do that with brand. What is the meaning behind it? What is the message? How can we impact people's lives? And whether it's in conservation, or whether it's in property, or whether it's in sport, ultimately it's about people leaving a legacy and leaving an impact. And and
absolutely,
that's why there's synergy between us and Film Duo, is because of that very thing, that you want to make impactful documentaries, and we obviously want to spread a message of hope as well. In terms of like, you can live your purpose, but your purpose has to contribute more than just you. It has to be about other people and other things, and that is why I love film.
Absolutely. And you know, I think it's also sort of I totally agree with that, but it's how you position things as well. And as I say, sort of, look, I'm a positive person, so I look, you know, however dark situation, there's some very dark situations out in the world right now, as we know. It is looking for, you know, light. It is looking for that positivity, because it is there. We will move forward in every aspect, but you want to reveal the truth. But I look for finding the positivity at the end of it. That's what I think is important to me.
So obviously we're coming to the end, but is there just one little insight tidbit for any budding filmmakers out there that to make better movies or better films? What would you give them as a takeaway today?
I think you know, we just take documentaries for a start. It's like, sort of, I'm a great believer in finding the authenticity. It's, you know, people put on masks in all walks of life at various points. We all do it. We all sort of, you know, sometimes have what you might call, you know, your business face or whatever, or the business phone call, the serious phone call.
Game face, telephone voice.
Exactly, all of that, or even dealing with families or whatever it is. But if you're making a documentary, you know, just push hard to get the subject to be authentic and reveal their truth as much as you can, because it will shine through. You will get a better result. But I think we're also at this stage in, you know, society, in the way we view so much content out there, that people clue very quickly into when something's not quite right. It's a bit false. And if you want to make your mark and you know, learn how to make better stories, find the authenticity. Can't say it. Be more authentic. There you go.
Be more authentic. So, how do they get hold of you if anyone wants to get into contact with Film Duo?
Well, we've got a website, filmduo.co, and we're on Instagram, and we're in various other social media places. We will have a YouTube channel before long as well. Those are the main protocols, really. So. Please get in touch. If you've got a story and you want to share it with us, then we'd love to talk to you.
Well, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Likewise.
We've met both for Film Duo. I'm sure we'll be back with some more tales and stories to tell, but it's been brilliant. So thanks so much, Jerry.
Yeah, thank you, Darrell, and look forward to doing more work.